Campers of Reddit, what is the scariest slash creepiest slash most disturbing thing that has happened to you in the woods? When I was younger, around 14 or 15 years old, my family used to camp at a state park. Every night my friend and I would walk through the woods. We called this the ritual. This particular night we decided to walk further into the woods than usual. We had flashlights. We liked to try and navigate through the woods with them turned off. We were about half a mile from the nearest campsite when we heard soft whispering behind us. Obviously, we hit the flashlights and spun around. Didn't see anything. So we kept walking and we hear it again. This time we stop and look around a bit before we decided to head back to our campsite. Then we see what's whispering. It's a lady crawling on the ground whispering just random words. She was wearing dark clothes and was covered in dirt. When she sees that we notice her, she stands up and declares that she is looking for her campsite. We ended up walking her back to the campground and tried helping her find her group. Turns out she was just super drunk / high and got lost trying to find a bathroom. Her friends didn't even notice she was missing, and if we didn't go that far into the woods, she would have been lost all night. It was pretty creepy. Safari guide here. Woke up one morning with something very warm, rather soft and comfy on my back. Realized my back was against the canvas of the tent. Realized it was an animal. It was a really cold winter night. Temperatures drop close to 0 here in the Lowveld. WTF? As I moved a bit, I heard the voice from my buddy from his tent. He spoke a bit hushed and with a definite tremble in his voice. "The Africa bug, are you awake?" Stupid me replied with a strong voice. "Yes." The animal next to me got up and luckily ran away. It was a big male lion. I was camping in a valley by myself with no cell service. I stayed late on a trail and ran into a nice local dude as it was getting dark. He showed me a local camping spot close to the road and the river, but camouflaged. I had a fire, drank beer, and listened to my friend's comedy podcast. I was loud and visible. Because it was dark already, I decided to sleep in the back of my truck under my topper next to all of my gear, as opposed to setting up my tent. The next morning, I made a fire, cracked a beer, and started making breakfast. Then I noticed that there is a man at the edge of my camp. He comes closer, but never looks directly at me. This dude looks homeless, has a long, ratty beard, and has at least 100 plastic grocery bags tied all over his clothes. I comment about how nice the day is. No response from him. I offer him breakfast. Nothing. He sort of paces around the perimeter of my camp. I offer him a beer, but he just turns around. The dude is just standing there back to me, wandering around. I'm realizing that there isn't going to be any good happenings. I had my bear spray and buck knife super close. I give him an ultimatum. "Motherfucker, you are either going to acknowledge me or leave immediately." He ignores me. I grab the bear mace and walk a few steps towards him. He sulked away and I threw my shit in my truck and left that place right quick. I wonder if he had watched me during the night, and I thank my laziness for staying in my truck instead of a tent. My parents' story, not mine. They were on a canoe trip way up in nowhere, Saskatchewan, far from any semblance of civilization. One morning, they hear a rustling outside their tent. Still half asleep, my dad sits up and tries to figure out what is going on. The noise is loud and very close. Before he can collect himself enough to go investigate, his whole side of the tent collapses in on top of him. The weight lifted quickly. Now, entirely awake, my parents scrambled to open the tent flap and figure out what was going on. About 10 feet away was a spooked black bear, staring confused and concerned at the tent. After being yelled at a bit, it ran off. We figure it had been foraging in the bushes right behind the tent and lost its balance. So my dad can truthfully say he has been sat on by a bear. My family went camping every summer when I was growing up. We usually bounced between Virginia Beach, Assateague, and this god-awful place called Westmoreland. One trip we were in Assateague near the beach, and we had 2 tents set up in different parts of the site. Sometime in the middle of the night, my mom woke up, which woke me. She was sitting up straight but completely still, and I looked over at what she was staring at. In the moonlight, there was the silhouette of what looked like an old woman looking into our tent. Long, wiry hair and everything. I was young, so it terrified me, and I started asking my mom what that was, who was outside. Once I made noise, it spooked the old woman, and she took off. And that's when we realized she was actually one of the feral ponies that live on the island. We had set up that particular tent on one of their trails, and they were going down to the beach. Scariest was camping with my wife when a windstorm blew up. I am talking trees being blown over, branches falling, the works, in a forest full of jack pine. The creepiest was camping with my best friend. We were in a semi-remote camping area. Drivable usually to get to it, but definitely only with a 4x4. It was a semi-maintained camping area, as in there were a couple of fire pits, a few rotten picnic tables, and a rundown outhouse. Parks checked this place once a year or so. So we get there and start setting up when Buddy wanders over to the shitter and opens the door. He stands there for a second or two, and then closes the door and goes to the second one, goes in and comes out a few minutes later. He comes back to me and says, "Go check out that first one. I assume someone shit on the floor or an animal got stuck in there and died or something. Nope, 3 full backpacks. And I am talking big bags. Like the bag I have that size I use for week-long trips. So we are nosy. We open them up. 2 are full of good quality gear, nothing unusual. The third is full of Skittles, bulk bags, small bags, regular, tropical, sour, every flavor and size of bag you can imagine. Just full of fucking Skittles. Camped for 4 days. Never saw a soul. Bags still there when we left. We let the COs know when we got to civilization. Who left all that gear? Why did one person pack 80 liters of Skittles? Don't know. But it was weird. Oh, another scary one. Dog and I were backpacking. Spur of the moment overnight trip. Wasn't far off the road or anything, so I just have a tarp up as a small shelter. Small little fire. Wasn't really hiding per se, but wasn't being obvious. Just dozing off when I hear a truck rip up and a bunch of drunken voices. Then the shooting started. Now they probably didn't know I was there. I was parked on a different road and hadn't realized I had walked as close as I had to the second one. But I still don't like being in the area when a bunch of drunken yahoos are shooting off guns. Especially when I was fairly certain they were shooting in my direction, based on the lay of the land. So I put Pupper on a tight leash and headed out ASAP. I was in the Boy Scouts, and one of the merit badges I was working on was Wilderness Survival. I was at our week-long camp out, and part of that merit badge requirement is to make your own makeshift shelter and sleep a couple miles away from the base campsite. There were about 8 of us boys, I'd say, and the adult leader would leave us there to sleep for the night. Well, I am already a pretty anxious person, and the days leading up to this had me a bit tense already. So of course, halfway through the night, I suddenly hear from the other shelter, "No, please, get away, stop, don't!" Then silence. I whisper-shout, "Hey!" No response. And it didn't even wake up anybody else. I quickly come to my senses that he was just sleep-talking and having a bit of a night terror. But to this day, I can't believe it didn't wake anybody else up, and that I was the only one to witness that, thinking we were all about to be murdered. I live in a rural town surrounded by mountains and forests, so camping is almost a weekly event, even in winter. The one I can't shake is when me and a friend broke off from our group of other 16, 19-year-olds to camp by a better fishing spot about a mile away. We only brought one tent for the group, so we built a lean-to against a large boulder in a clearing. I couldn't sleep because I had the feeling something was watching us. I assumed it was a mountain lion, which isn't that big of deal considering their behavior, so I threw some more logs on the fire. I looked up from the fire, and under the light of a full moon, there was a man standing at the edge of the clearing about 80 yards away. I was frozen and couldn't take my eyes off him while he assumedly stared back. He walked off in the opposite direction after about a minute or two. I doubt he had any ill intentions, but I sat there holding my friend's .357 the whole night. Edit. I didn't wave or call out because I was terrified. I was frozen since I was 16 and inexperienced. Nowadays, I would call out and see what's going on. Also, mountain lions aren't a concern. I've been stalked by them and have stumbled face to face with a few. They aren't a big issue or fear if you understand them. Camped in the bottom of a valley with pretty steep rocky walls on either side on a backpacking trip in the Sawtooths in Idaho. In the middle of the night, we were all woken up by the sound of a rock slide, something that happens often in a place like that, I'm sure. Not like a whole mountainside giving way or anything, but at least a few large boulders tumbling down. We could hear them getting closer and closer, smashing through large trees and destroying everything in their path. Thought about running out of my tent, but it was pitch black out, and even if I had a clear view of the rocks, I wouldn't be able to see them or where they were going. Decided there were no options with any better odds than just staying in my tent and hoping I picked a lucky spot. We couldn't find any signs in the morning, and the rocks might not have gotten any close than a quarter mile for all I know. But that feeling of helplessness was pretty disturbing. Went on a group camping trip in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, only to awake and hear something sniffing the outside of our tent. My immediate reaction was that it was likely a bear or some animal that came across our site, and just maybe my dumbass friends didn't tie up the garbage. Seconds later, I can hear the sniffing go to the tent next to ours, and everyone in mine grabs one another quietly to acknowledge we all were awake and were aware of what's happening outside. Moments later, a friend in another tent popped out and started to scream and make noise. He had a gun too, hoping it would scare off whatever animal was in our sight. Turns out, it wasn't an animal. It was some guy who had gone through our cooler's food and also decided it'd be okay to sniff our tents. Our friend chased him off and we immediately packed our shit and left. Edit. Alright, since this is floating at the top, I thought I'd a second creepy camping story. A year after the above incident, my dumbass friends and I went back to the nearby area, thinking what we encountered was a one-time incident. This time, we thought we'd outsmart any possible creepers, and instead of camping in our tents, we all slept in the beds of our trucks and SUVs. 'Cause they can't possibly sniff a Toyota Tacoma? Anyways, it's the middle of the night. I'm passed out in the back of my SUV when I suddenly feel a bright light on my face. Naturally, I would have woken up, cussed, and asked who was doing that. However, I instantly knew to pretend to be asleep and not let the individual know I was awake. I laid there next to my girlfriend, hoping she would do the same as I, and I kept an ear out for any unusual sounds, like sniffing. All I could hear was a friend snoring by the campfire. After the light left my car, I heard the person walk to the next truck and shine his light on my friends in there. I slowly looked up and it ended up being some older guy, just standing there staring at everyone while they slept. I waited until he left the campsite and I busted my ass out of that truck and woke up my friends, most of which had also been pretending to sleep and realized what was going on. TLDR. Don't camp outside of Tucson, Arizona, unless you want a hill-have-eyes creature sniffing and staring at you while you sleep. Thanks for watching. Make sure to leave your stories in the comments section. I'd love to make a video about them in the future. Make sure to like and subscribe too.